The Minister for Resources, Josh Frydenberg. And while he joins us, here's Green's Larissa Waters on that Adani mine, the Indian-owned coal mine venture in Queensland.
It's a real outrage that this dog of a coal mine has been approved once again when 15 international banks have said they don't want to finance this project, with the coal price being so incredibly low that we actually have very dwindling customers for this coal anyway. There was a real opportunity today for Prime Minister Turnbull to make a break from Tony Abbott's climate policies. Unfortunately, they've just ticked and flicked the latest coal mine, and despite the fact that the market conditions look very poor for the prospects of that mine, that region needs employment, and it's not going to get it from the fake jobs that are being promised by this mine that probably won't proceed.
Josh Frydenberg, good morning, welcome.
Nice to be with you, Barry.
Do you think the Adani mine will ever go ahead?
I do, and the Carmichael project is of great importance to Queensland and to Australia. They're not my words, they're the words of Gary Gray, Labor's spokesperson on these issues, because he understands, like we understand, it will create thousands of jobs. It will see more than $15 billion invested into those regional economies. But most importantly of all, it will help lift hundreds of millions of people out of energy poverty, not just in India, but right across the world.
What about the viability of it, though? There are two Australian banks that said they won't be investing in it. A lot of international banks are saying the same thing. And they're not just worried about pressure coming on from environmental groups. They are worried about the viability of it.
Well, we've seen a downturn in the price for coal, but this project has more than a 40-year lifespan, and there's a clear increase in demand for coal and indeed energy across the world. In fact, energy demand will increase by a third between now and 2040, and the International Energy Agency says 75% of that demand will be met by fossil fuels. Now in India, they produce their own coal, but they can't meet the market because they've got so many people, over 100 million in India, who just don't have access to electricity.
Yeah, the issue, though, is what they're prepared to pay for it, isn't it? In 2011, when this was first, when this project was first went ahead, prices were high. Now they've fallen dramatically, and apart from that, it's the remoteness of the mine makes it an expensive proposition.
Well, you're right. The mine is remote. It's 300 kilometres inland in dry, dusty central Queensland. But the point is, the world needs energy, and India needs energy, and because of urbanisation, because of its size of its population, because of the changing demographics and the growing middle class, it needs energy. Now, coal is a cheaper source of energy than other forms, and that's why they need it. And the emphasis, I just dare say it, in India, as well as in Asia, is on cleaner coal. How to use these high-efficiency, low-emission coal-fired power plants, which Australian coal, which is low in sulphur and low in ash, is well made for.
But you're making it sound as if selling coal overseas is like some sort of foreign aid effort on our part.
Well, I think there is a strong moral case here. You know, I've just been at the G20 and at the APEC Energy Ministers meeting, and they pointed out that over 1 billion people, Barrie, around the world don't have access to electricity. Now, this means that more than 2 billion people today are using wood and dung for their cooking. Now, the World Health Organization says that this leads to 4.3 million premature deaths. That's more people dying through those sort of inefficient forms of energy than from malaria, from tuberculosis and HIV/AIDS all combined. So there is a strong moral case that the green activists sometimes don't comprehend.
So where do they get their coal these days anyway? It's apart from Australia and Indonesia, who else is opening up coal mines, new coal mines?
Well, South Africa is very active, but you're right, Indonesia has increased their coal production by 18% over the last year. You'll also look at India, they've also increased their coal, but they can't meet their demand. And Australia has a big role to play because we're the second largest exporter of coal in the world.
Will Adani be relying on some government subsidies, or can they go it alone?
Well, look, this is a commercial operation and it needs to stand on its own 2 feet. I've said when it comes...
no subsidies?
Well, I've said when it comes to the $5 billion concessional loan infrastructure facility we have for Northern Australia, that will be releasing the criteria shortly, but this wouldn't be a priority project for us.
But there might be some money in there for rail projects?
Look, that wouldn't be a priority project for us. We've got other ideas about energy infrastructure, about water infrastructure, about roads and the like. I believe that the Carmichael project will go ahead, but it needs to be standing on its own 2 feet without strong government.
Because another coal mine producer, Glencore, have already put it on the record that they'd be a little offended if you brought in new players with government subsidies and put their operations at risk, and they've stalled some of their operations.
Sure. I mean, Glencore have had some of their own challenges, but look, this is a competitive environment. You'll hear competitors say about one another certain things like this.
What about the environmental risks? Of course, it's a massive project and it's so close to the Barrier Reef, at least with on the export side of it.
Well, Greg Hunt has gone through the most rigorous assessment process ever when it comes to the federal government. He's put in place 37 different conditions. I think he needs to be commended for that. He's gone about it in a very measured way. And of course, the Queensland government have their own environmental processes. So this has the support, dare I say, of the Labor Queensland government. In fact, it was initiated by the Bligh Labor government.
Are you still going ahead with that legislation to prevent what you call the vigilante environmental groups from challenging these sorts of projects? Is that going ahead?
Look, it's still our policy. Obviously, it will run into a bit of a few obstacles in the Senate, but it's still our policy because we want these projects to go ahead, of course, with the proper environmental considerations and standards, but we also don't want to see vexatious litigation.
Now, you've just been to Turkey, to the Philippines and Japan. Are you getting any feedback on the new Prime Minister?
Very positive feedback. In fact, when I was in these global meetings, people had done their homework. They knew that he was a very successful businessman. They knew Malcolm Turnbull was focusing on innovation and productivity and business reform, but they also were very conscious of his position on renewables as well as on climate change, and that was all warmly welcomed where I was meeting.
So the renewable energy thing is a plus?
Oh, absolutely.
And so no more talk of against wind turbines?
Look, we're agnostic when it comes to the particular forms of technology we use to get to our 23.5%.
You're now
target.
agnostic on wind turbines?
Well, our view is whether it's wind turbines, whether it's solar panels. In fact, we've got the most number of solar panels across households per capita than anywhere in the world, or whether it's hydro. We're agnostic as to where this clean form of energy, renewable energy, comes from.
But do you now have a better sense of the advantages of renewable energy than perhaps before you took the trip?
Look, I've always been very conscious, as has Greg Hunt, of the strong role that renewable energy plays. And we've already invested, Barrie, and this is not always understood, we've already invested more than $1 billion in more than 230 renewable energy projects. We've got a great record on the solar side, and we're supporting more than 350 scientists through the CSIRO Energy Flagship Program to invest in new forms of energy technology. So we're at the forefront of the world in this area.
Speaking of investments, what about Malcolm Turnbull's investments? Do you think it might be better if he invested his money in areas that are not based in the Cayman Islands?
Well, I think we've seen this week Labor's arguments fall flat on their face because Malcolm Turnbull has passive investments, transparent investments in funds that invest in international equities, not in Australia. Now, he has no discretion over those investments, and what people don't like about the politics of envy is that it's been put by political opponents who themselves are laced with hypocrisy. Because what we've seen from Bill Shorten is he has superannuation funds with investments in the Cayman Islands, so he should never have made this argument.
With the opinion polls, with Malcolm Turnbull so popular, why are the two parties so tight? Why is it 50-50 in news poll?
Well, I think, Barrie, this is early days in the Turnbull Prime Ministership. I think people like what they see. He's talking about the future, he's talking about innovation, and we've certainly had a strong jump in the polls as well as a strong jump in business confidence. But if you look at his ratings compared to Bill Shorten, he's ahead 3-1.
He is, but what are they? Why is the party 50-50? Is it that they're waiting to see whether it is genuinely a new government or it's just Tony Abbott repackaged?
Well, as you know, Barrie, there are a whole range of polls. Some polls have us 51-49 ahead, some have us 56-44 ahead. We're ahead in a number of the polls, but the point is, under Malcolm Turnbull, he's getting on with governing. He's speaking very positively about the future. He's talking about innovation. He's talking about technology. And they know that he comes to the role having proven himself in the business world as well as in the parliament. And so it's a very confident start.
So from somebody who voted for Tony Abbott, do you now accept that you're in much better shape than you were 4 weeks ago?
Look, I accept that Malcolm Turnbull has had a fantastic start as Prime Minister. He has my full confidence. I'm privileged to be in his cabinet. We've all put those decisions and those days behind us, and now we're getting on with the job of governing for Australia.
And has Tony Abbott put it behind him?
Look, I think Tony Abbott has handled himself very statesmanlike since he's left the Prime Ministership, and as I've always said, he should leave the Parliament at the time of his own choosing. He's earned that right.
Thanks for your time this morning.
Nice to be with you, Barry.
For more people.